Hi everyone, Lady Rose of Goddess Garage here with you. I wanted to let you know that I'm going to be doing a new playlist on my YouTube channel. So I'm very happy that you're here and watching one of these new videos. I'm going to be doing book reviews. Now I do have a playlist, I think it's called Fairy Tales or something like that, where I have done reviews of fairy tale books, mostly for children and whatnot, and I tell you what it's all about or what's in them and that sort of thing. And I'm still going to do that. In fact, I want to do more of those. I haven't done some in quite some time, but I also wanted to get into other books because I get asked all the time, as someone who teaches paganism and shamanic work and witchcraft and many other things that I teach, crystal healing, angel healing, Reiki, and all that kind of stuff. I get asked all the time, fairyology and dragonology as well, all the time, of what books do I read or what books do I have that talk about those subjects. So I am going to be doing a few books in this review. Now, when I get more into the big magical books and whatnot, I suspect I will probably put those on my Patreon. So I am going to be revamping my Patreon and having tiers where you can take a look at different things. So it will be my Patreon supporters who will get access to those kind of videos. But for now, I'm just going to start this playlist here on YouTube and see where it goes from there. So let's begin. I am doing native themed books for today. I have 3 of them that I've just read recently, and they all seem to go together. One took longer than the other, and I'll explain why in a minute. But I'm a Mohawk of the Iroquois Nation of the Bear Clan. So we're a 6-nation confederacy. We're called the Iroquois, technically speaking. We call ourselves Haudenosaunee because the word Iroquois is actually the name the Algonquins gave the white men who came over from Europe, and that's the name they used to call us. So it's kind of a butchered version of the Algonquin word snakes, because the Algonquins and the Mohawks and the Iroquois are long-time enemies, and we would fight with each other a lot. So they didn't really like us at that point. We seem to get along well enough now. And I wanted to talk about some Native American books, partly because when people say Native American or Native Canadian or Indigenous or whatever, Indian, sometimes people use that word as well, they group us all into one big group. And we were all over North America, and we had different cultures, different tribes. There's a lot that's the same, yes, but there's also some things that are different. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that because, as I said, I'm a Mohawk, and my mother was taken from her reservation at the age of 7 and thrown into the foster care system, separated from her brothers, and she lived with her sister for a while, but they had periods of separation as well. And she was very disconnected from her culture, and thus that trickles down into other generations, mine included. And I have, over the last probably 20 years, taken much more interest in my culture that I knew was missing. My mother taught what she knew, and she did a lot of research. So I was very lucky that my mother was able to do that kind of research as to what our cultures are like. So a lot of this is also from the tongue of my mother, so to speak. But I've been getting into books as well, and I took a course on my own people. I know, it's really bizarre, but it's a screwed up system. And like I said, I was feeling disconnected. I've never lived on my reservation, even though I've lived near it. I've never lived on it. But this book I really enjoyed. Now, this book does look like a kid's book because it probably is. It's more like, the 8 to 14-year-old kind of book, but it is actually really informative of what the Iroquois Nation is all about. It tells you everything. It has pictures included, but it tells you who are the Iroquois, because we are 6 nations. So Mohawk, we call ourselves the Flint people, and we're the guardians of the fires at the east door. And Seneca is the guardians at the west door, that keep the fires at the west door, and everything in between. There's Cayuga, Oneida, sorry, that was really hard to say for some reason, Onondaga, and then there was a 6th one. It didn't come in until the 1700s, so it's still a young tribe that we brought in. It was Tuscarora. Hopefully I said that right. The Iroquois Confederacy has been around over 1,000 years. So it was in 1722 that this other tribe came up from the south of what is today United States and joined in with our Confederacy. And it even has a map of where each of the tribes were. So it talks about who the Iroquois are, what our traditional life was, and how the tribes all interacted together, and what Europeans, when they came over, what kind of changes started to happen, and then the Iroquois of today, how things are going today, obviously, and some of the traditions. And they have maps of the Iroquois lands, so you can get an idea. We were quite a big group. And then there's also a recipe for strawberry juice and further reading that you can do. But I found it very informative. So Haudenosaunee is, what, like I said, what we call ourselves. Iroquois is an Algonquin name that was given to the white men to call us. And the Haudenosaunee means people of the longhouse. So we're notorious and famous for having built longhouses. We were farmers, at least the women were, and we were very well established, a very powerful Native community. And this is a very informative overall, like what the Iroquois are about. So I highly recommend this book. I'll put it in the description below. So if you want to get one, it's a quick read, but it's packed with information. So the next book that I'm going to look at is 21 Things You May Not Know About the Canadian, or about the Indian Act. So the Indian Act is the Canadian Indian Act, okay? So this is like not recommended reading. This is absolutely must be read reading that mandatory reading for anyone who is a Native American, because you will be shocked and horrified. It's also really recommended, highly recommended reading for anybody that wants to create reconciliation. And if you want, to make peace, this is definitely the first way to go to find out what went wrong, right? So these things were things that were actually law, which is what's shocking, right? Canada's known as being like, oh, we're so nice and we're thankful. We did some atrocious things as Canadians. Now, I am what's called a Native with a foot and 2 canoes, because I'm not full Native. I'm Mohawk, but I'm also Irish, and I often call myself an Irish Mohawk. So, I got some white men in me too. But I was shocked. I couldn't read this whole book in one sitting. This one is the one that took me a long time to read. And I know I drove my husband nuts, because almost every page I was like, listen to this. Listen to what is in this book. Can you believe that? This is real. This really happened. This was, something. So I would have to pick up this book, read maybe a chapter, if I was lucky, if I got a chapter in before being totally shocked, and I would have to put it away for 2 or 3 days. And then once I was over that wave of shock and anger and sadness, I would pick it up again and I would read a few more pages, and then I would put it away. It's like I was getting very angry with the book. But like some of the quotes, okay? So this is in the 1920s. Duncan Campbell Scott, the Deputy Superintendent General of Indian Affairs, wrote, and he's Canadian. He wrote of as the Superintendent General of Indian Affairs, I want to get rid of the Indian problem. Okay, that's enough in itself, right? Our objective is to continue until there is not an Indian that has not been absorbed into the body politic. That's how they spoke back then. And there is no Indian question and no Indian department. That was the whole sort of mission statement of the Indian Department. Okay? Now, I'm just going to give you a few quotes, but these were shocking quotes. But this explains a lot too, right? So this is 1876 to 1985. Okay, so this kind of thing was going on. The ultimate purpose of enfranchisement or loss of status rights as an Indian was to encourage assimilation and to reduce the number of Indians the federal government was financially responsible for. Really? And to get rid of the Indian problem. The Indian problem pops up again here. It needs to be recognized that status Indians were not considered people according to Canadian laws, and did not become people until the Indian Act was revised in 1951. And the only way an Indian could become a person outside of that was they would have to reject and revoke and give up their native culture and their native family and say, I'm no longer Indian at all. And that's the only way they could do it for a long time, and it was men that could do it. Indian men over the age of 21 who were deemed sober and industrious could apply for enfranchisement. That means I could apply to say, I don't want to be an Indian anymore. If they qualified, they would receive an allotment of land carved from their home reserve. After 3 years, they would receive a title deed to that land. And if they died without heirs, the allotment would be turned over to the crown. If the man was married, his wife and children were automatically enfranchised. They automatically lost their status. And if he died and left children under the age of 21, they would become wards of the government. So it wasn't like, oh, a grandmother or an aunt or an uncle can take the children. No, they become a ward of the government, right? And we all know the government took children off the land. My mother was one of them. Indian children were taught in the schools that everything about them, their language and their cultures, were wrong and hedonistic. Let's see, what else do we have? We have another one here too. I have a lot highlighted. There's very little that's not highlighted. I had another one here. Where was it now? But it explains a lot of things about the Indian Act that was atrocious. So in the 1920s, the Indian Act, Section 141, made it illegal for Indians to hire lawyers or raise money to hire legal counsel. This also meant jail sentences for anyone who lent Indians money for lawyers or legal counsel. Because again, we weren't people under the law. So yeah, there's a lot here, a whole lot to unpack here. But that's just gives you a taste, but it's definitely like these were all actual written laws on the books, and it will be very eye-opening and very shocking. I say take your time in digesting it. I know I had to take my time. I've learned a lot about my culture through work and study and whatnot. And I know one story I heard at one of the workshops that I went to pre-COVID. They were talking about how government agents would not or would come on to the reserve and ask the children if their parents had had anyone over to their homes recently, and were there a lot of people that came over? Was it like a little party? Because it was illegal for us to practice our religious culture ceremonies and whatnot. So if the children didn't know this, of course, and they sometimes told on their parents without realizing that's what they were doing, and they would then go and arrest the parents for having had, the celebration. It wasn't until the 1950s that the first ritual was celebrated without fear of the law coming down on you. So we weren't people. We weren't allowed to express our culture or celebrate, worship, whatever spiritual work we wanted to do was not allowed at all. The other thing too is, I can't find it now, but I know I read it here. We weren't allowed to leave the reservation for a very long time. We had to have a special pass that an Indian agent had given us. And by Indian agent, I mean a white man that worked for the government that supervised what we were doing. So with this pass, we had to not only say when we were leaving, we had to say what time we were leaving, what time we were going to be back, what we were doing off reservation, like if we were going to a doctor's appointment or something. We had to say exactly everything we were doing. And if we did not, we faced jail time. If we were caught off reservation, or if we stayed longer than we said we were going to, or we didn't do exactly what we said we were going to do, kind of thing. So yeah, it's quite interesting. So this is definitely mandatory reading, especially for Native Americans, because I know I was not aware of this at all. I mean, I knew there were things that had happened that weren't so great, but this was shocking. And then I got this book. So this book soothed me after this book. And this is Sisters in Spirit, and it's a very, very interesting read. You probably know, what's her name again? Where is it? Susan B. Anthony, I think it is, right? That, was talking, fought for the suffrage of women. And suffrage, I know they've done this on late night shows of, modern day people, are you against suffrage for women? And people go, yeah, I am, and not realizing suffrage is getting the vote for women, because they fought for a very long time. It was decades long that women in Britain and in Canada and around the world were fighting for the vote, because women in the marriage contract were, when they got married, all of their earthly possessions now became their husbands. So if a woman got left a farm with land from her parents because they had died, if she got married to someone, that farm and that land now became her husband's. And we were considered property, not people. And if you were a working woman, your paycheck went directly to your husband. You were not allowed to collect a paycheck except that it went to your husband. Also, we didn't have control as white women. We didn't have control of our own children. If a husband died and there were children left behind, he could legally make them wards of other family members or friends or whatever. He could take them away from the mother if she survived as well. So if the father died and the mother was alive and these children, but it was in the will of the father that these children are now going to Aunt Alzina or whatever, the woman had no say in that. It was that's how it's done, kind of thing. So we did not have control of our children. We could not own land. We could not get a paycheck. We could work for a paycheck for our husband, and everything that was ours as far as possessions go before we got married is now our husband's after we married that person. So it was not great, right? So other names in women's suffrage that you may not have heard of are Elizabeth Stanton, Matilda Gage, and Lucretia Mott. I think I'm saying that right. And they, along with the other one there, learned a lot from the Iroquois women. And this is because the Iroquois system is set up as a matrilineal system. So, like I was saying earlier, we were farmers. And the thing is, as women in the Mohawk community or the Iroquois community, we owned the land. We were the ones that farmed. And this is, part of the reason why a lot of the men got really upset when the government put us on reservations and told the men, go and farm this land. And you can't sell to anybody who's white, but you can sell to someone who's native. So you can't sell anything off the reservation. So you won't make money farming, but this is what you're going to do. But when you say that to someone of the Iroquois Nation, you're basically telling men to do women's work, and it's like, so that's why part of the reason they were upset, because, well, that's what women do, right? And not that they had this divide and gender thing. I mean, they did and they didn't, but it was very, very equal. And it was kind of funny because the women, like I said, owned the land. They were the matriarchs of their family. When you were born into a family, a mom and dad, you followed your mother's line. So I follow my mother's line. That's why I'm Bear Clan, even though my grandfather was Wolf Clan. He was Turtle Clan, sorry. And I have another aunt who was Wolf Clan, I think. So my grandfather was Turtle Clan. And my mother, when she first connected back up to her people, she would tell us, we're Turtle Clan. But then she was taught, no, you actually follow your mother's line, not your father's. And so we're Bear Clan, as it turns out. So, and my children are Bear Clan, and my daughter has 2 grandchildren, and they are Bear Clan as well. So you follow the mother. And the women had the say. Yes, the Mohawks are notorious warriors. We're very, very good at that. But a warrior could never go to war unless a woman elder or grandmother, or all the mothers, as they say, agreed to it. They were the ones that said yay or nay to war or not war kind of thing. And you could be stripped of your warrior status if you stepped out of line inappropriately. Same thing with chiefs. The chiefs, yes, they were male. He wore the horns, so to speak, but they were all nominated by the women. The women decided, okay, who's going to be up for nomination. Then we had council, as far as I understand it, and I think it was 2/3 of the council had to agree, okay, this is going to be our new chief. But it was a grandmother that could always knock the horns off should we not feel like that chief is serving his title properly, if he's not being honest, if there's something that's come up, like we find out he's a really bad guy. It was a grandmother or mother that could knock the horns off, as they call it. And when white women were taken in skirmishes that happened between natives and white guys, when the women were taken as hostages or prisoners of war or whatever, there were many, many instances, and it's documented here, of when the skirmish was over and the women could go back to their home, they wouldn't go because they were more prisoners in their own home than they were as prisoners at the native communities, because they could not believe how free the women were. It was just, unthinkable for them. So I've got a couple of good quotes here. If you just bear with me while I find them. Susan B. Anthony, that's the other one. Yes, I think I said that already, but just wanted to make sure. So she's the famous one. She's the one that went to jail for breaking the law because it was against the law for women to vote, which is weird because they were not considered people either. They were considered property. Let me just see here. And did you know that at least for the Haudenosaunee, rape was almost a word that was like, they didn't really have a word for rape. because it didn't happen in their community. Because if anything like that, if a man stepped out of line, there was definitely some stuff that would happen that was not good for them. Let me see here. Where are we? The Untold Story. This is it's just a really good, like, where a lot of these women got their ideas and got their inspiration as well, and their fight for the woman's vote. Just in the back here, even. Where was it now? Well, this is funny. I mean, this is such a Mohawk woman thing, or an Iroquois woman thing to do. So at the last General Council held by the United States with the Iroquois Confederacy in 1794, their Haudenosaunee women countered a prayer that had been offered by the preacher Jemima Wilkinson. He was the preacher that was there, and he, in his prayer, called on the Indians to repent their ways. The Iroquois women took issue with this, of course, responded through their representative, which is their chief, and the women very much said, "You tell them this," and the chief would go and tell them this. So the white people had pressed and squeezed them together until it gave them great pain at their hearts. And they thought the white people ought to give back all the lands they had taken from them. They, in turn, the Iroquois women in turn, called on the white people to repent and wrong the Indians no more. This was after the prayer for Indians to repent was said. So interesting how, that went on. Iroquois women are involved in all political decisions. Yes. The women were the great power among the clan as everywhere else. They did not hesitate when occasion required to knock off the horns, as it was technically called, from the head of a chief and send him back to the ranks of the warriors. The original nomination of the chiefs was always rested with the women. So, like I said, they always nominated who was applicable. So they went to court. Where is it now? This is a very interesting part here. So Susan B. Anthony was arrested, and that's why she's a little more well known, and on trial for voting. She showed up and tried to vote. She got arrested for it in 1873, and this drew the nation's attention. So at the trial, Gage is this lady here, wrote about the trial of Susan B. Anthony. And she said the judge that was presiding, she described him, a small-brained, pale-faced, prim-looking man who displayed his nervousness on the day of the trial. Now, this was the first criminal case this judge had ruled over, had been called to try since his appointment, and with remarkable forethought, he had penned his decision before hearing it. The judge did not allow the jury, there was a jury there, but he did not allow them to decide the case, nor did he consult them or allow them to indicate their opinion in any way. Judge Hunt, that was his name, found Susan B. Anthony guilty of voting. Guilty of voting, and an act that is expressly forbidden to women under New York state law, and fined her $100 plus the costs of court. Of course, Anthony refused to pay, and then it goes on. So Virginia began in St. Louis. So this woman, Rhys Heppersett, I believe is her name, refused. She went to vote, and the register of voters, the guy that was there, refused to place her name on the list because she was not a male citizen, but a woman, and therefore ineligible to vote in Missouri, in association with her husband, Francis, because married women under common law were unable to bring a lawsuit independently of their husbands. So, it was Virginia Minor, sorry, that Virginia Minor that, was placing the lawsuit. She sued for damages, along with her husband, of course. They lost in the circuit court and on appeal to the Missouri Supreme Court. So they lost both cases. Finally, they carried their case to the Supreme Court, and with Frances Minor acting as chief attorney, Frances Minor argued that what would become the landmark case for women's suffrage. The decision was unanimous. The 9 white men sitting on the Supreme Court agreed this is one. Chief Justice Morrison R. Waite's unanimous opinion stated, so this is one of the opinions, the Constitution of the United States does not confer the right of suffrage upon anyone. Suffrage is not coexistent with citizenship, the court declared, and states have the absolute right to grant or deny suffrage. Women do not have the right to vote protected in the United States of America, the Supreme Court ruled. Women have no part or lot in the foundation or administration of the government. They cannot vote or hold office. They are required to contribute their share by way of taxes. Oh, they'll take the money to the support of the government, but are allowed no voice in its direction. They are amendable to the laws, but are allowed no share in making them. So they've got to follow the laws, but they can't say what the laws or contribute to what the law should be. This language, when applied to males, so if this was said to men as well, would be the exact definition of political slavery. So, yeah. And religious conservatives warned that the divine order of the universe would be overturned if wives stood beside their husbands at the polling place. It's like, oh my God, the world will end if women vote. It's like, really? Oh my God. So, I have just a couple more quotes if you bear with me, because this is just, to me, I love history, but sometimes the history is just shocking. It's like, seriously? So adopted by each state after the Revolution, a single woman might own property, earn a living, and be economically independent. But upon uttering the marriage vows, she lost control of her property and her earnings. She also gave away all rights to the children she would bear. Offspring became the property of the father, who could give them away or grant custody to someone other than the mother in the event of his death. With the words, "I do," a woman literally gave up her identity. Legally, women lost her name, any right to control her own body. That is true, because when the birth control pill first came out, they would never give it to a single woman, and women could not have it unless their husband gave permission to have it, and to live where she might choose. A married woman could not make any contracts of any kind, be sued or sue. So yeah, I guess you can't be sued. That's maybe one thing. She was considered dead in the law. Wife beating was not against the law, neither was marital rape. She's my wife. I can do whatever I want with her. Really? Okay. Excellent. I'm glad we're all together on this. Keep flipping to the same pages. It's not the page I want to be on. I had it marked, but I've lost the marker for it. Because it was like, oh my God. Maybe it was earlier. Here it is. Yes. Okay. So, they're talking about history and the teaching of history. And as a Native American Mohawk, I know that I remember my high school teachings and teachings of history and whatnot. and the natives got maybe a page or two, right? And I'm sure it's sort of the same everywhere else. I know I've had teachers come to me to ask me about native knowledge and culture because they see that it's lacking in the textbooks. And the old saying, the winners always write the history, right? So let me see. But it is behind us now, and the white people who supported slavery were totally unlike us today. Okay, so this is what they talk about, like when we address this, even as white people. So we may teach about slavery in a way that makes it safe. A distant story for white people. Granted, it was a terrible part of our history, they may say. Yes, of course. But it is behind us now. And the white people who supported slavery were totally unlike us today. So this is kind of interesting. I like this. It's like, yeah, okay, yeah, And like, oh, that's not who I would be, right? An hour of unease in a classroom or a museum, and we can move on, reassuring ourselves that had we lived then, our home would have been a station on the Underground Railroad. Really? In reality, it probably would not have been. Most of us would have been silent on slavery. Many of us would have actively favored it. Only a few would have had the courage to stand up to the charges of being, because you were against slavery, you were a godless, man-stealing, law-breaking thief. And these words would be hurled against you if you were an early abolitionist. At a time when the Constitution had slavery built into it, the ministers preached that slaves should obey their masters. Those who opposed slavery had to resist the law, had to break the law, and generally speaking, go against the church as well. Abolitionists were accused of stealing the property of slave owners when they helped fugitive slaves to escape, and they faced jail time for it. Anti-slavery activists were considered radicals who upset the social, political, and religious order of society. How dare they? It's just, it boggles my mind. Ethical people opposed slavery by breaking the laws that sustained it. And that's what the women were doing about voting as well. That they had to break the law. It was literally against the law for them to show up and want to vote. And in 1848 was the first women's rights convention, where this idea in America anyways, where it was, we want to get the women the vote. So this was the first women's rights convention, 1848. Women did not achieve a recognition of their constitutional right to vote in the United States of America until the 19th Amendment of the Constitution was finally enacted in 1920. Like I said, it was a decades long, almost 70, a little over 70 years. 70 effing years. Okay? So I'm Canadian, so I'm going to talk about Canada in a minute here, but around the world, women's suffrage. The British actually were the first to allow women to vote in 1918. So it wasn't until 1918, so they're not like that far ahead or anything. And it was only women over 30 years old that could vote, by the way. We don't let young women vote. They have no brains. Then the Dutch in 1919, so a year later, women won the vote and they could vote. Yay for us. And American women didn't get the vote until August 26, 1920. I'm like, oh my God. In Canada, women's right to vote first came in actually in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta in the western provinces only. And that happened in 1916. Look at us ahead of the world. I mean, yes, we had an atrocious Indian Act and our reservation system. I know someone who is from South Africa and they had apartheid. And she said a lot of the apartheid acts were modeled after the Canadian Indian reservation system. So we kind of like drew it back a little bit. We let women vote in 1916, as early as 1916. Look at us go. But it was only certain provinces. It's like, okay. And then the government granted the vote. So it was probably a provincial thing they were allowed to vote on. And then the federal thing came in. The government granted the vote to all women, but for a limited time. Only during wartime in 1917. Only while the men are away. Okay, we'll let the women vote because you're here. And the politicians want to get into their offices, right? Full suffrage for women in Canada was granted in 1918. So we were ahead of the States, yay. But we were about equal with everyone else in the world. And really, everyone else in the world wasn't that far ahead of America. But that's just some of the books. And like I said, they took a lot of inspiration. They were adopted, a lot of them, or a couple of them were adopted by the Haudenosaunee, because we're notorious for adopting people into our tribes and stuff. And it says Haudenosaunee Iroquois in brackets, influence on early American feminists. And this is a really, really good, powerful, empowering, hopeful read. There are some shocking things, like I said, about how these laws were built into the Constitution. The women's argument was we fought against the British because we were getting taxation without representation. We weren't getting to vote in those people way across the pond kind of thing. And then they felt like everybody should be equal under the law and everybody, every man is equal and whatnot. But women aren't. It's like, didn't we want to step away from that? That taxation without representation. As a woman, you were allowed to pay the taxes, but you weren't allowed to vote. So some really interesting reads, definitely worth it. I'll put the links below in the description if you want to make a purchase of any of these books. If it's interesting reading for you, it definitely was for me, but I have a personal thing into it, of course, too. I guess that's it for me. All right. If you make a purchase, it does help me out, so that I appreciate that. If you click the link to buy the book or buy whatever you want to buy, they're all Amazon links because I'm an Amazon affiliate. So I do appreciate it if you click those links. While you're here, if you haven't subscribed, please do so, because I would love to have you as a subscriber. I appreciate you being here and listening to me meander on about how shocked I was by all these books. And I hope to be back with other books. They won't all be native based and shocking like today, but I'll try and find some interesting books that I can review for you. Okay, take care. Bye.